Hello. Still very hot here. So it's time for another Bhagavad Gita video. And today we're doing chapter 4, verses 4 to 9. Arjuna said, "You were born much later than the sun. So how am I to understand that in the beginning of time you had taught him?" The Blessed One said, "I have had many births, and you as well, Arjuna. I know them all, but you do not remember them, defeater of your enemies. Though I was unborn, my undiluted soul existed as the transcendental form of myself within the great Lord. Being in this state, it is my choice when I incarnate my soul into this world. Whenever and wherever true spirituality has become deteriorated, scion of Bharata, and there is a predominance of false religion, I will appear at that time. I will help the true students, and I will cause strife to the wrongdoers. I will remind people of the true way. I will appear age after age. Anyone who realizes the reality of my transcendental birth and actions will never take birth again in this form. Instead, he too will connect to me, Arjuna." So these are some still parts of the introduction of this chapter, but they're very important. They say some important things. In the previous chapter, if you haven't watched the last video, or rather not in the previous chapter, but in the previous verses, if you hadn't watched the last video, Krishna mentions that he had taught the yoga he is now going to show Arjuna. He had taught this to the sun himself. And here, Arjuna kind of points out, well, the sun's been around much longer than you have. How is it that you taught the sun? These verses that follow in answer to that have been a cause of frequent misinterpretations, both in traditional Indian religion and in the West. And let's get to the first part of why that is, which is what Krishna is saying when you hear him say, whenever and wherever true spirituality has become deteriorated, scion of Bharata, and there's a predominance of false religion, I will appear at that time. Well, it's at every generation. At every generation, there are enlightened beings who appear. Rather, enlightenment appears in order to fight against the ignorance of deteriorated spirituality. True spirituality that deteriorates becomes religion, right? Or commerce, one of the two. And so you see that in the West when they took elements of Indian spirituality and commercialized them into this kind of New Age salesmanship. And so you have people in the West that talk about how, oh, we're just energy beings that are temporarily in a human body. We're having a divine experience in a human body, and we're not really here, you know. And in fact, they talk about how, oh, everything you do, it's because of your choice. You know, as if, you know, it's very funny. It must be just a coincidence. The people saying this are always fat middle-class Westerners and not starving African babies. You know, I've never seen any starving African babies say, well, you know, I chose to incarnate here, right? And this is, of course, a complete bastardization of the actual theory of reincarnation as it is taught in Hinduism and Buddhism. And Hindus and Buddhists want to stop reincarnation, right? Because they understand that it's about cause and effect. Karma is cause and effect. You are reborn. You don't choose where you're reborn, at least not in any sense other than the way, you know, someone who was born stupid chooses to end up in jail or something like that, right? you're born into the place that is the product of the consequences of how you have gone so far in your spiritual evolution. You are born into the place equivalent to your level of spiritual awareness. And even that's only in the most general of senses, right? It doesn't really mean that because if you're born into a millionaire family, it means you were a good person before, and so you deserve it. And if you were born poor, then you were a bad person before. And that's nonsense, because spirituality and consciousness has nothing to do with something like social class, right? It doesn't. That's irrelevant. So, getting back to this, right? On the other hand, you have certain sects like the Hare Krishnas, who want everything to be about Krishna, saying, well, this what it means is that it was literally Krishna, and that he has come back as a living God age after age to teach people, right? And that's also nonsense. That's not what he was talking about here. He was talking about enlightenment, right? What he's talking about here is that the transcendental form of himself within the Great Lord. So the Great Lord is the universe, right? The transcendental form of oneself, right? That is enlightenment, right? He says, I exist as enlightenment. Before I was here, I was enlightenment. After I'm gone, I'm enlightenment again. Right now, I'm Krishna, right? And what he means is that enlightenment incarnates over and over again to assist humanity to push to the next level of spiritual evolution. And that's why you can't talk about Krishna's enlightenment or Buddha's enlightenment, Jesus' enlightenment, my enlightenment, anybody else, your enlightenment, anybody else's enlightenment, right? There's no such thing. There's only enlightenment. Enlightenment is a state. It would be like talking about my, I was going to say my gravity, but I actually do have gravity, right? So, but it's like talking about, my physical materialization, right? Well, everybody has a physical materialization, right? So like my universe, this isn't my universe, right? It's enlightenment is not something that belongs to you. By definition, it happens when you stop being there to be in the way for it, right? So it's very notable that, traditional Hindus, which sometimes take a very kind of prideful, they have a lot to be proud of in their culture, but they want to talk about the ancientness of their religion and stuff and see it all. They create this mythology of it all having been one thing that was always the same, and that's what they do now. And that's, this right here directly contradicts it. Why is Krishna there right now talking to Arjuna? He's there talking to Arjuna because spirituality has become deteriorated in that time. He was there to create the new aeon, right? To bring in that new way. So, you want to imagine, as people tend to with religion, because religion is just the empty shell that's left when real spirituality is gone, that, it's unchanging and it's perennial from the dawn of time and all of this, right? But as I mentioned in the previous teaching, right, the form of communicating this, the formula of enlightenment has to change every time, because human spirituality evolves as the human consciousness evolves collectively and individually. So when Krishna shows up here, what he's saying right here is the Vedic culture has turned to crap, right? He's saying it was great 2,000 years ago. It was really good back in that time. Now it's shit, right? And I'm here to destroy it, right? And to present something new. And you could call what ended up coming out of what he taught to be sort of Brahmanism, right? And then later on, Brahmanism turned to shit, and then Buddhism came along, right? And then that turned to shit, and this has happened over and over again, right? So there isn't this eternal religion that has a dogmatic structure that is being preserved from impurity. That's not what these lines are saying. They're saying exactly the opposite. They're saying that the essential truth can no longer be contained in these warped and perverted vessels that become belief systems, right? Because belief is the opposite of truth. Belief isn't truth, it's the opposite of truth. If you believe something, it means that you're trying to convince yourself of something that might not be true. So an enlightened being is there to shatter the belief system. and to try to expose you to truth. That is reminding people of the true way. That's what Krishna is doing. So that's what every enlightened being is doing. And it's the same enlightenment that Krishna had. It's not that the enlightened people now are Krishna. It's that Krishna had the same enlightenment that enlightened people now have. Anyone who realizes that reality of what enlightenment is, right? That is the reality of my transcendental birth, as he puts it in the line, right? If you understand that reality of one and the same truth of this enlightenment, then you overcome the limitation of your little self. You never take birth again, as he puts it, right? Instead, you become part of that enlightenment. Everyone who attains to awakening becomes part of the same awakening. That's everything for today. Thank you very much. If you like this video, please feel free to share it. And if you're interested in a genuine spiritual system, please look at the Yifa Society. And I'll talk to you again soon.